Welcome to the modified settings tutorial on how to mark out your setting for your cabochon, and particularly cabochon in glass. Okay, so I've got my first one here. I'm going to be going and showing you a variety of different options today, and how to address different things and different ways of doing it. Okay, first of all, I've got my triangular kind of shaped one here. And this one, I've decided that this one, because this would affect possibly some of my options, is going to be one of a series of triangular ones that would create a bracelet. Okay, so they'll be used with some rings to create a bracelet. Okay, so with this, first of all, I'm going to need to trace around the outside of the shape. Now, if I just hold it down with my finger, the chances of it moving as I'm trying to get around are quite high. So I've got myself a really small piece of blue tack, and I'm going to push that on the bottom, and I'm going to really make that really flat. I don't want it to be sticking up and causing any kind of issues with me getting my shape nice and neat. Once I've got that stuck down, I can then easily trace around it. I'm kind of trying to hook my pencil just that little bit under the actual cabochon as well, because I really do want it to not stick out too much. Be too visible. I want it to kind of have the glass really be the thing here that's being shown off, and just have my setting as a way of holding it so it can't fall out. Okay, once I've got my design traced around, I can take my piece of glass away. Okay, now I am going to apologize in advance here. This is done with my iPad, so this is just the best possible angle, and I'm hoping that along the way I can do things like lift my page up and show you what's going on. And still get you enough to see what's going on, how to do it. I do have a plus in the middle of there, just ignore that. That was just so I could make sure it fitted in the video. Okay, so what I've also done outside of this is I used a bit of a sticky note to just kind of see when does it start to curl around over the most outer part of my shape here. As soon as it starts to kind of curl back in, that's when I really need my prong can stop from that point on. So it was about 5 millimeters. Now, because I'm going in a little bit from the underside, and I want to just give myself a little bit of extra space, because I can always remove it. I can't add more material on very easily. I'm going to go about 6 millimeters in terms of my length away from my design. Okay, so right now what I need to do is to start to mark out my outer boundary that my prongs are going to go to. Using this piece of small ruler that somebody created for me along the way, and I'm going to make a series of marks as parallel to the line that or point that I'm currently at as possible. That are all 6 millimeters away from my edge. It's going to allow me to create the same shape but 6 millimeters away. Now, a faster way of doing this could be to use a compass that you've set, a proper compass, not the ones you put your lead pencil into, the ones that come with a little piece of lead. Set that to 6 and use that to create these marks instead of a ruler. Still wouldn't use it to actually draw the shape, just because you run the risk of not actually being parallel to your lines and creating a circle instead of a shape and hooking it into too much. I do have a divider set up to show you how to do that. I just don't have a compass here to show you what that might look like. But I've opted not to go with the divider option because it's going to cause too much damage to my page. Okay, so dividers, imagine this was a compass instead, and I can just use that to quickly and easily create those kind of marks instead. And that one was definitely a bit off, wasn't it? The other benefit of having lots of lines is that you can actually go, oh, okay, that one was not quite in the right spot, because it should roughly line up with everybody else. Okay, so hopefully you can see that series of dots around there, and then I'm going to use that to kind of generate my outer shape. That should correspond with the inside shape, but just larger. Okay, so once I've got this drawn, I next need to decide how many prongs I'm going to have and where I'm going to place them. So I've already decided that because it's a triangle shape, I only really need 3 prongs, and that should hold it in quite well. So I'm going to only have the 3. Now I could have 6 if I wanted to be a bit fancy and have it look slightly different, but I really don't need to worry about that. I'm going to make it out of a thicker metal so that it does have that extra strength included in it. I'm going to have one along each kind of edge there. Now to get this kind of looking even-ish, I want to try and pick a midpoint. So that's about 15 on that side there, so that would be what, 7.5-ish. Roughly in line, can't do that. That ruler is not good for this. Roughly in line with where that point would be. I'm just going to draw in some construction lines to kind of help me get this hopefully lined up and looking fairly neat and even. Now, given that glass has a fairly irregular shape anyway, it's a bit hit and miss as to whether this would actually really do better than eyeballing it, but sometimes it does pay off quite significantly. Okay, so I've got my kind of center points there, my center lines, and then I just want to figure out how wide do I actually want my prongs to be. Bearing in mind that I am going to kind of file these and make them look neat and tidy anyway. So I'm going to have them about 2 millimeters wide. So I want to come off from each of those lines by about a millimeter on either side. Okay. I hope I'm not, you can't see anything, can you? Now, if I had a fancy design, I'd be including that in my shape, okay? Hopefully you can see things a little clearer on this angle than you could on that one there. Now, I'd always double check this so that if it just didn't look right with the lines that I'd drawn in, maybe I hadn't quite picked the right point of the curve on the opposite side to get it looking nice and perpendicular to my edge, then I can always erase it and give it another try or draw another starting point and go again. Don't just go, oh, well, I used a ruler, it must be correct, because it might not always be in the best interest and actually be correct like that. Okay, so this last one here actually looks a little off. It doesn't actually look like it lines up with my center line very nicely. I'm just going to change the starting point just a smidge so it lines up a bit better. So you can see there now I have those 3 prongs. Now because I don't have this, I'm just going to connect this to some tube on the bottom and they'll go into the rings. That's all I actually need to do for my design. If I wanted to round these over, I could give that a bit of a rounding now, but I'll most likely do that after I finish cutting anyway, so I probably wouldn't stress too much about achieving that now unless I needed it to be a specific length back down that I wanted to have a taper, which it could be. If I wanted that to be even on all of them, I could come back and taper down from that if I wanted to. But that's pretty much that one then done. Okay. Don't forget you need to photocopy or take a photo of these to stick in your book. And from this point here, I can also decide now how big of a material piece do I actually need for this. And I'd probably say that 25 by 25 is probably going to do. Yeah, 25 by 30. No, 25 by 25 should probably do me. Get this on there because I only actually need that there. Yeah, those bits there. I don't actually need this outer ring at all. Okay, cut this out, stick it on using your double-sided sticky tape or your glue onto your bit of metal. Good to go. Alrighty, Next one, if I want to have something a bit more precise, or I might want to have a feature actually in line with something, then I can also use something like a grid. So I've just drawn this grid up myself, and this is the piece that we're going to be using this time. Okay, so this is a roughly circular kind of shape. It's probably slightly more ovally shaped, and it's got this distinct kind of bit of dichroic down the front here that I really want to have vertical. It's going to be for a ring anyway, this one, but I really want to have my prongs perfectly evenly spaced around it. I'm going to have 4 for this to make sure I can hold it in really nicely. So I'm going to use my grid, and I'm just going to kind of align it within the square that it fits into, given that it's kind of circular, bearing in mind where I want my centre line to run for to space my prongs out, to make sure I've got that bit of dichroic really nicely centred in. So I'm not using a ruler, I'm using my eye to kind of just check that I am actually centred in that space. And I've already got my blue tack on there, so just giving that a wiggle and then realigning to make sure I'm in the centre. And then from there I can again hook my pencil under, trace that around. Now, as before, if I don't get that right, I can always move across to another square if I needed to get it slightly more accurate again. Okay, so now I've got my circle there. I can actually use the existing lines to create, just so that you can see, line it up with the side of my circle. Make sure I'm actually the same distance away here and here from each of those lines. And then add in some new construction lines that I can use to generate my distance away if needed. Okay. If you had a really rectangular kind of shape for your cabochon, this would be a very good option for getting that nice and neat and quick and easily done. Okay, so I've drawn in some lines a little bit closer to where I want to be. And I can then go away 6 from that. But I'm actually going to just go, so if you were having a rectangle shape and you were going to have your 1 on each one, you definitely want to do something like this to make it nice and easy to measure from, or you could just use the lines. I'm going to have them at 45 degrees out from each side of my prongs. So I'm going to take my centre mark, line it up with one of the sides on my cubes, and just draw myself a line in. Now I could have just done both lines, I just want to give a chance for you guys to see what's going on. This is a very soft pencil, so yeah, blue tack has erased some of it, which is not very nice of it. That's what happens. Okay. So there and there. So I finish putting this last one here in as well. Okay, so I can come away from that, measure out 6 millimeters from the edge of that for each of them. So this time I don't actually have to draw an outline the whole way around. Now I do still have to come away from each side by the same amount to generate my nice neat rectangles, but once I've done that, I then have my template all set up to go. So that's how you can use a grid instead to help you if you have a fairly geometric shape. Irregular shapes don't tend to work so well for grids, but geometric shapes do. Okay, so what happens if you have a super irregular shape? Okay, so my next one is going to be this piece here, which is this kind of wormy shape. It's a really cool kind of design. And we're actually going to have 4 prongs on this one again, but they're going to be, rather than having to be at the top and the bottom, if I was going to do them at the top and the bottom, I'd probably want another set in the middle here. Rather than doing that, I'm going to go just where it starts to flare out to there, and then just where it starts to flare out below there to there again, and then it shouldn't be able to move away from that. So that's what I'm going to be hoping to do. But first of all, with this kind of funky shape, I want to first define where my line is that I want it to hang along. This one's going to be a pendant, this one, so I'm going to need to be very, keep moving it out of the scene, need to be very strict about that for my design. So I'm just going to draw myself a straight line to start with. Okay. And then along that, I want to place my pendant so that I'm happy with how it would sit, being in line with that. Okay. So you can kind of see how that's sitting and how that's going to hang. All right. Again, trace around it as normal. Make sure I'm getting right under there. Now, because I'm not actually having my piece go all the way down this far, I'm only going to have them in the centre here. Why am I drawing that still? Well, I might want to just know where that shape sits so I know what I want the rest of my design to look like. Okay. So I'm just going to keep that in for a sec so I can have another kind of look at where it starts to flare, which is about there and there, and where it starts to flare here, which is about there and there. Okay, now these aren't going to look evenly spaced because of the way it's held, but because the piece moves and has that flow, it's not going to matter so much that it doesn't look super evenly spaced. Okay, I'm still going to need to come away 6 millimeters from my edge. Okay, and I'm going to do that just a little bit on either side of each of those bits to get some kind of perspective and spacing around of it. You see here that my ruler is kind of, well, hopefully you can see, moving quite a lot more on that axis because of the curve that I'm trying to match and follow as best I can to get that proper spacing as we go around here. Okay, so I've got that kind of external shape there and there going on. Okay. Alrighty, so trying to get my line to still be fairly parallel because I don't want it to be wonky, but there's going to be a bit more eye movement going on for judging this. So not parallel, sorry, perpendicular, not parallel, to the line at the point that it is. And then as normal, you're going to come away, assuming you're just going to have a straight prong, about 1 millimeter on either side. You're going to actually mark it out though, rather than eyeballing it, because yours is going to be used as an actual template. Mine, I just don't want you sitting here forever. Okay, now because I have this as see-through, I don't actually want to have the metal running all the way behind it if I don't need to. I want to allow it to have some kind of light coming through it in certain places. So from this one here, I'm going to come down and maybe just come to a bit of a drop. A bit of a curvy kind of drop in design there. Okay. going to go out to my prong, along, down, along underneath it, along underneath there to the next lot of prongs. And then from there, I'm going to kind of curve up to the point here where I'm going to have my pendant, my bail kind of working happening. Okay, so that's going to come like that. This one here is going to curve in, so I'm about the same distance away as what I want for the width of my bail. So you can kind of hopefully see some of my darker lines going on there. Okay, and that's what I'm going to be keeping in behind my pendant. Okay. Now for my bail, I'm going to quickly go through that with you as well, because you're assuming you want that. The type of bail that I'd be looking at doing is something like this one here, where it's flared on the sides. Okay, so I need to know how much material is it that goes around up to the point of that and then curl back. And as you can see, this is not actually soldered, it's just kind of curled back on itself and then bent forwards. And that's what I'll be kind of looking at achieving with my one here. So rather than bore you to death with this, I'm going to have a bit of a guess. That's probably about 8 millimeters. Okay, so I'm going to go a total then of 16 millimeters up from the top of my pendant and make a mark. Okay, at 16, and then I'm going to make another mark at 8. Okay, and these are going to be my kind of centre marks. How wide do I want that flare to be? Okay, let's make it about 6 millimeters. So I'm going to come away 3 millimeters on either side of my line to mark out my width and create some more construction lines with that. Now you'll notice that I am actually using the middle of my ruler for this. As long as I have a point that I can mark it to, and I know how far on the side I'm going, it doesn't really matter if I use from 0 or not. Okay. So I'm going to take these, make these parallel across there as well, my centre mark there where it's going to be its widest. This one here is where it's going to go back to its narrowest. And its narrow point down here is about 3 millimeters, so roughly half of that. So I'm going to come out 1.5 there, 1.5 there as my endpoints. Okay, so then I can bring this out to my wide point, curve back into my narrow point there. Same on this one here. Give it a curve like that. And that top part there then is going to be curled over to form that flared bail. Okay, so there I have my outside shape. Alrighty, that's pretty much it for this. Don't forget, before you cut around this, to stick this onto your piece of metal, to take your photo of it, or take your photocopy of it so you can stick it in your book for your working drawing part of it. Alrighty, I hope that was useful and helpful. So give you some tips along the way. Alrighty, bye-bye.